So, if you could just introduce yourself, Max.
Oh, you want me to introduce myself? All right.
Yeah.
It's Max Neukäufler. I try to pronounce it how it is pronounced in German. I'm from Austria. I am Austrian. I'm in Austria right now. Actually here at the foot of the Alps, if you will. I am originally from Innsbruck, in the in the heart of the Alps, right next to Switzerland, Germany, and Italy. And yeah, after pretty much 12 years, more or less on the road between all kind of other countries and continents, I recently came back to Austria, and was somehow stuck here, with the whole Corona situation stuff, and just decided to take the plunge and settle in a little bit more. So now I'm actually coming at you from my own place, so like my apartment. I've got a workshop down in the basement. And yeah, so what am I doing? I'm a craftsman, I would say. I do a whole bunch of stuff. It was kind of an accidental dive into that. I've been doing this ever since I'm a child, basically. The first memories I have are fishing, archery, and just wanting to do cool things that I saw more or less in movies and stuff. And my family was very supportive of that. Getting me books about Native American style bow building, Native American style backed bows, stuff like that, etc., etc. So fast forward, going through university, biology and stuff like that, archaeology for early history, that kind of studies, and lots and lots of skills training around the world, fortunately. And so that's what I'm doing now, implementing whatever I was fortunate to learn, from, I don't know, Japanese swordsmanship in Japan all the way to canoeing up in Northern Ontario. And I just find that all of these things have so much in common, and that's why I get to implement now in craft, in teaching, and spoon carving, designing tools, making tools, all the good stuff,
Yeah,
so that's more.
You are an actual ninja, aren't you?
Yeah, like that's a little bit of a controversial topic, I'd say. No, I think what's interesting is that it's a little bit difficult to talk about skills training without sounding braggy, Okay. I think that the term expert has unfortunately gotten a little bit of a negative, how do you call that, like a negative aftertaste, if you will.
Yeah.
And like a few years ago at the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu camp that I went to here in Austria, I had a seminar with a guy who was launching this entire network of seminars called the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Globetrotters, I think. And he was talking about skills and expertise and stuff like that. It was quite interesting for me to hear the take on that. I think experts are just people who have spent a considerably bigger amount of time, out of whatever reasons, on a specific topic, and thus just were able to gain more experience, thus the expertise in a certain direction, right? Which is not necessarily meaning that everything is right these people do, or whoever does. I always consider there's a 50% chance that I'm wrong about everything I'm saying and doing, but I think it's quite still like a great opportunity for people to tap into someone's experience of, let's say, a few years or decade or lifetime, to give you a digest version of whatever they're interested in, rather than sending you through all the bumps and stuff that come along the way, right? So I'm still a big fan of expertise and experts, because subject matter experts is what I love to learn from, and which allowed me to rather quickly get better at things that I was interested in or fascinated with, right? And over the years, being really interested in martial arts, I started with judo when I was like 6 years old, and I went through like American football, went back to capoeira, and then MMA, Thai boxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling and eventually Japanese swordsmanship in Japan. And again, it sounds very braggy, but what's interesting for me was no matter if it was in Thailand, like a Thai coach, a Brazilian coach, a Japanese coach, or someone teaching me about canoeing, like Becky Mason, all of a sudden I was able to see, rather than the differences, I would see the parallels between the things that worked for me and the parallels between the things that didn't work for me as a student first, and then eventually as a teacher. So I'm eternally grateful for the opportunity to go to very, very vastly different places with different mentalities and different skills, to just find what these things all have in common, right? Over the things that are different. Well, I mean, someone would argue, where's the similarities between mental shot control in archery, you know, learning Thai boxing somewhere in Phuket and carving a spoon. And it was one of the most fascinating things I was ever, you know, gifted, that I found the parallels between them, which I can now implement in my own craft and in the way that I teach skills to other people, right? Definitely.
So what do you think some of those parallels are between, say, archery and spoon carving?
Well, the parallels between everything humans do, in my opinion, is, and I always add my opinion because I'm fairly young, I'm fairly at the beginning of everything I'm doing, but there is a couple of things that kept jumping at me, right?
No, Max, this is the internet. Let's state it as a fact. It's not your opinion. This is the truth.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, like I have to go a little bit. The thing is, like, I'm usually just really, really aggressive with the way that I state things.
Okay.
And you know, as probably people know who know me, who've worked with me, and like we know each other. We've never talked like this to each other, but we know each other probably for what, like 6 years.
Yeah. We've messaged back and forth for quite a while.
Yeah, we've messaged back and forth, and like we've kind of followed each other's journey to a certain degree for that amount of time. So I consider knowing you in a certain way. Yeah. Like not in a very personal, in-depth way, but like, you know, how you see someone progress and go through a journey is telling you a lot about them. Not to be confused with knowing the actual person, because I think this is happening on the internet a lot, as you just put, right? So that person said that on that post, and therefore this is what this person is like. Yeah. No, so I think that the parallels between all of these things is it's all happening with the same body, the human body, and it's happening with the same mind, which is the human mind. And a lot of the things that I've learned are not based on just personal mentality and mentalities differences between cultures and backgrounds, but they're like very much based on actual like science when it comes to human psychology. And it's just, it is fascinating to see with all the differences we have, where the things are that we're so similar, right? So the parallels between a lot of these different skills and directions is that you're presented with a creative challenge, you know? So it doesn't matter if you're stepping up to a peg at a 3D course, or you're hunting, or you're in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu match with a stranger to you who's trying to, you know, tear some limbs of you off, or you're trying to carve a particular design into wood. So we're facing these challenges, you know. The last thing I wanted to say, like you could maybe try a new decoration in a new piece of wood, or you're facing something like a difficult grain, or you know, you're having an idea. Like I just recently did a course called Muse to Wood, where I'm really tackling where design's coming from. You know, where for me personally, what is the process that I'm going through to like towards a original design that is like somewhat having like, you know, and capturing me in a way, right? what are the steps? And like there's a huge challenge because you're going from a problem, so to say, to a design to tackle that problem. And then you're putting that into wood, you're doing that, you're reevaluating it, you're getting back to stage one to improve that design in order to get to a final idea, right? And this is what I'm kind of, that's what people go through to do design. It doesn't matter if it's product design, a spoon design, you know, a t-shirt, it doesn't matter. It's always kind of the same process, right? So all of these are creative challenges, you know, and that there's ways how you tackle these, and there's ways to think how our minds are kind of dealing with these problems. In archery, for example, I was lucky to learn from a guy who's a SWAT instructor for the SWAT team, like a sniper instructor for the SWAT team. And he studied like how the mind is reacting kind of to these pressure situations. With open and closed loop control systems for motor programs. It's quite in depth, but it's very interesting how it works for all of us, how we react to it slightly differently and how we overcome that, you know. And I find the same thing in spoon carving. And another thing that has that archery shot and like that particular person has taught me is the difference between an automated motor program and a learning curve, because we're all starting with the same way of doing things. When we do it the first time, we're very controlled and very consciously going through the single steps that are doing a certain movement. Like, you know, you're shaking someone's hand when you're a child and you're doing it for the first time. It's awkward, you've never done it, you're really like focusing on that hand, you're seeing that visual cue of someone reaching that hand out to you, your brain's kind of processing that. And it's very conscious, the single steps of doing that. And then, but thus it's not very efficient, right? So as soon as you are kind of having it down, your brain doesn't want it to be that inefficient anymore. So it just, it basically just memorizes it as a motor program. It's called handshaking. But at that point where this is like automated and efficient, what your brain and your subconscious really wants, you're not learning anymore. So putting yourself back, like specifically into that conscious state of doing things, means that your learning curve is always progressing.
Right.
So
yes.
That's, for example, something that I can apply to any skill, any task. It doesn't matter if it's soccer, spoon carving, dancing, or shooting an archery shot. Whenever you're putting yourself back into these conscious movements that are slow enough that you can actually evaluate them, you're constantly learning. And so that was one particular thing that is similar to all of these things. The other ones are that I learned from grappling. When you're in a challenging situation, you have to overcome a creative challenge, so to say. It might be in a match where you're stuck in a position that you've never seen before, and you don't have an answer as far as technique. What you have to rely on and fall back on is the fundamentals that you've learned. In that case, the fundamentals of body positioning, controlling hips, all of this kind of stuff that you learn in grappling. And it will allow you to overcome that creative challenge, although you didn't have a specific answer for that problem.
Yeah.
So when I apply this to spoon carving, this is how I teach that, is understanding the right, answering the right question, asking the right question and answering that question is going to allow you to overcome a challenge that you've never seen before. So that's why I always talk about, I want to make people creative problem solvers, and I don't want to make them technical zombies.
Yeah.
Because I can show someone all day long different knife grips and all of this kind of stuff, and it's just equivalent to positions or techniques in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or any other thing that I have mentioned, but it's not going to help me when I'm presented with a specific challenge. What is going to help me is answer the right question, and the specific question to ask is why. We are focusing a lot in skill training on how and what, because that's the fancy part. That's the how am I going to hold a knife, how am I going to do this, how am I going to do that. But it has a specific limit. So I was always learning very quick from watching other people do things. When I went first to Japan, I lived there for 4 years out of the last 11. You know, I had a girlfriend there. I went to Japan 17 times. I had a lot of time to train, you know. So very quickly, I became fairly good in swordsmanship, not because I understood it, but because I watched people that I thought were good and I just imitated them. And it allowed me to progress very quickly. The problem is just I hit a dead end at some point because the actual skill was not based on a solid foundation of understanding, but it was just based on a pure focus on how and what, but it was not focused on the understanding of why, you know. And I can take this through my solo canoeing trips in Northern Ontario all the way to Thailand. It doesn't matter what skill it is, and this is what I'm trying to say with this very braggy monologue. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be about how to make pancakes. It doesn't matter. The how and the what is fairly quickly explained and imitated, but it's gonna fall short whenever you're facing a problem because you're not understanding why you're doing certain things. And now circling back to like the different trainers and coaches I have, the problem I usually had was that specific countries, or like not countries, but people generally in certain countries because of the history had a certain teaching style that was not focusing on that type of explanation. It's typical for Japan, for example, where I've trained judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Thai box, not MMA, swordsmanship, Japanese archery. I was able to do all of that there, and like because of this wide range of things that I did in the country, I realized that the focus was purely in the beginning stages on what and how and repetition, but it was never really on the underlying reasoning for the actions. And that is very, very difficult for me personally to learn from. It's also a typical training style in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu over there, where you're getting a lot of different technical stuff, but you're never really getting the reasoning behind applying a certain technique. And I've struggled with this severely. Then I had some coaches from Brazil and from the US when I was living in California who switched it entirely around and never focused on technique at all, but they entirely focused on the underlying fundamentals because they said, you will not face this specific situation in a fight, but you will face, or like in a competition, you will face a random situation that you will not be able to reply to unless you really understand the underlying principles of what we're doing here. So they purely taught principles, and in the end, it got me in a shorter time further than in a very long time of studying specific techniques, right? Yeah. Another parallel is the human body. That is just, this also comes from grappling and especially capoeira back then when I did a lot of acrobatics, just seeing where your body is the most efficient and where it's the most inefficient and needs the most energy to basically run a certain task, you know. So grappling taught me, of course, a lot about like keeping things very tight towards my body and like using my entire body for tasks, right? And based on that understanding is how I design the tools, how I teach carving. In combination, basically, with the mental part, I teach the physical part that is somewhat going in the same direction to make it like a wholesome approach to anything I do. It doesn't matter what I teach. I also teach swordsmanship, and it's the same. Like I would really break it down, really focus on the fundamentals of mental and physical. Because the funny thing is, you will always be able to make up a technique on the spot if you need to, if you understand the fundamentals. But you will not really necessarily, like some people step behind the fundamentals alone. No doubt about that. It doesn't need me to teach that to people, but it's going to take a lot longer to go from the technique to the fundamentals, or like to the underlying fundamentals, than going from the fundamentals upwards, if you will. If you have the trunk of the tree, building the branches is rather fairly easy. If you have the branches, it's gonna take a long time and a lot of trial and error to get down to the trunk, if you will, you know, and into the roots. So that's just my approach, and I'm happy that I had some pretty good feedback about the courses and seminars I've done, because what I'm trying is to propel people's understanding forward. Because no matter what skills I'm getting into, I always see that there is a very big amount of disinformation or misinformation about certain topics, because the human mind just likes focusing on what and how, and like equipment and outcome, but
Yeah.
it's not so interesting to focus on the boring part, so to say, right?
So what would you say are some of the biggest myths that you hear like bounded around about green woodworking, spoon carving, craft?
I would say there's many myths. Like in other things, it's easier for me to get into myths. Like when it comes to, I don't know, archery, grappling, and stuff like that. There's so many I could talk about. But in greenwood carving, I don't think that there's that many myths. I think there's just the focus on the wrong part, so to say. I don't know if that's, but it's just like like certain things get blurred out as it's normal. For example, there is somewhat of a myth, if you want to call it a myth, that the tool is the limiting factor. And I'm a tool manufacturer myself, and I love making tools and designing tools, and you know, like I just dig all of these thingies because they all have a meaning to me, and I know where the wood came from, the steel came from, and all that. However, I think that there's better tools can help you reach your potential in a different way. They make things easier, especially if you do it more. There's a lot of things that better tools make easier for you. Edge retention, design, you know, handle design, blade designs, bevels, angles. There's so many things. And it almost sounds like me talking about other crafts, because it's always the same thing. Angles. You can even find it in boxing.
Yeah.
Angles are so important. They're important in craft. They're important in tools. They're important in efficiency in carving. But they're as important when you're in the ring. Angles are making things a lot easier in general. So, but it doesn't mean that you can't start with a nice like middle ground tool, you know, somewhere affordable for anybody, and not modify everything because you understand how. Like that's why I do some of the courses, because with a course like sharpening a hook knife, you can take a crappy knife, let's say it like that, and you can modify it to something that really serves you very far and very long, right?
Yeah.
But again, here we are hitting the limitation of understanding of certain fundamentals. Sharpening is one that I basically just mentioned. The difference between a fairly sharp tool and the kind of tools that we are working with on the level where we are at, let's just say it like that, there's a huge difference. You know the difference when you're production carving of a tool that is performing not because of its design necessarily, but just the sharpness part. Right?
Yeah.
The very first spoons that I made, and that's maybe like an interesting thing to just recap. Why did I even start making any spoons? I think I was just fascinated with blades and tools in general. I like axes, I like tomahawks, it was the whole romantic part, right?
Yeah.
I like knives. I still know the first time that I got my first knife, and like all of them were always little sacred items to me, which is very archetypical in my opinion, that humans are just drawn to these simple, sharp tools, right? It's just something that has been with us for such a long time. We're curious.
Yeah. Knives existed before humans did. So
at least, if not earlier, not earlier. But it is just something I think that's very deep inside our human experience. And with us for a long time, we're curious. We like making things that make life easier for us because we lost pretty much every other skill. You know, and that's what I said in one of the videos I've posted a long time ago in Japan. Like humans need to be materialistic from the very foundation of their existence because we lost all the other skills. We need stuff to do things for us because, you know, we're naked and slow and weak and that. And so it's fine to do that. It's just let's do it the best way possible. But because of that, I think we're drawn to these tools and these things. And axes and knives are the simplest tools that we basically have. except maybe for sticks, you know. And we love the versatility in them, and that was what I liked. Wherever I looked in the old sagas or movies or something, the cool dude always had a fancy knife, you know, and he did stuff. He had a tomahawk, and he had something to throw, and he had an axe, and this and that. And I love that thing. My big frustration was just that I had all of these interesting tools, and they were just sitting around, you know.
Yeah.
I didn't want to just whenever I got my first Bowie kind of thing, like Muela, when I was like 10. I remember I went out to the hazel forest and I cut hazel sticks all the time, and I made bows and arrows out of them, and I made spears out of them, and I backed them with materials, and I made like arrows with goose feathers and little knife blades I got out of little whatever steak knives as a point, and I was just running around outside shooting at things, and I needed the knife for all of that. But then eventually I don't know, I wanted to take this further. I wanted to use proper tools. I was never interested in the Austrian way of carving. Stubai, the manufacturer of Gouges and other tools, quite famous, was literally like 30 minutes away from me. But I was never interested in the mask carving and the crib carving that we did in Austria, you know, the more decorative carving. We make our Krampus masks from a certain type of pine tree, you know. All of this is done with gouges and chisels of different types. But I was never really interested in that, or furniture making. It was not how my brain was working, because all of that was very methodical, very organized, and my brain is a beehive of sorts. But making also the usefulness of the product, I was never interested in decorative or like artistic things. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just like, me personally, I like art. I just was never really interested in making things that would sit somewhere. I wanted to make things like bows, paddles, knives, moccasins, bags, you know, stuff like that, because I knew it will be used and in the same manner that I'm interested in, you know. And that brought me to spoons, because what is more useful and more perfect in its principle than a spoon, you know. So that was the reason I started. I could use an axe and a knife, and then at the end I had something I could give to my mom, and she was nice enough to actually use it. I don't know how she did, because those pieces were severely looking like pieces of firewood. But no, I made a couple of cute ones. They were not super practical. They were like long, shaped like a paddle and weird, but
computer. Cool. Okay, we are recording, so stop swearing, Max.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry for that last one. I hope you can sleep tonight.
Yeah, it's just gonna be.
No, I'm just kidding. It was totally rated R. So.
All right, so
hello,
established. Everybody. Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for
welcome
giving
back.
Me to get that oiling process done. It is a work day after all.
Yes, it is. So yeah, what's on your agenda for today? Your work day?
So like I told you before, I sometimes just really let my social media for all things help me a little bit with the organization, because I'm really bad at that. So this is something I really would like to get at least mediocre at. And I'm just using somewhat of a hashtag game to a certain degree. I know this sounds horrible, but to just guide me a little bit through the week, because there's every day so many different things that I could make and could do. And I have to really admit that I'm just not always feeling like it, and then it's really difficult to get creative, right? But yeah, I just, you know, I usually go with a magic Monday. Monday is usually the day when we all need a little bit of that, you know. So I'm just saving myself usually a couple of nice spoon blanks that are somewhat promising. Not all of mine are for today. And so today, what was on the agenda was finishing a pair of kayak spoons for a friend of mine who ordered these from China. These are Apple. And then they have the this type of proprietary chip carving that I use. And then they're carbonized and oiled. And so thanks for letting me finish that. So that goes up tonight as far as some pictures to get everybody going. And I really like the carbonizing. Unfortunately, you don't see it in the light, but gets a little bit of a 3D flicker effect sometimes with some woods when you do that, you know?
Nice.
Well,
Yeah. So you said you've got some hashtags that you're using. There's Magic Mondays, and then what are some of the other ones that you're using?
You know, like all the different things that just me personally that I'm interested in and that I usually make. And so I try to keep it really revolving in a way, but also kind of taking turns, right? So I'm trying not to, it's for myself, it's also sometimes I find good for the social media. How do I say, like, to keep the attention span up a little bit, just to throw a little bit of dopamine in there. I find that I'm a little bit of dopamine deficient person. And it's kind of interesting because I read that recently about different training effects, that some people who have a lack of dopamine would choose very different types of training so they don't get bored, which is what I do. I run and then I spa and then I lift, and I have to really take turns, otherwise I'm getting bored. And other people have different deficiency tendencies in their bodies, and then they would rather like really long 1-2 hour cardio sessions, and that would get them happy, so to say. And I find that in my work as well. So I kind of mix it up. So Magic Monday is usually just some really more elaborate carving. Tuesday is tools, so where I just share some of the tools that I'm manufacturing. Wednesday is woodcraft or wilderness, depending if I just came back from some type of canoeing or something. Thursday is thought through. It usually gives me the opportunity to go a little bit deeper into some type of draw and literally unbox something. For everybody. Friday is usually fancy or fixed blade, depending on what's on the table. Saturday is usually training or something like that. Stay sharp, whatever. Saturday and Sunday is just specialty or Sloyd, depends. And I know that's a little bit silly, even like just going through it sounds silly to me, but it just helps me organizing my week better because I'm really not good at it, you know.
Yeah, I love a good structure to a week, so that doesn't sound silly to me at all, to have like those kind of things in place to help you kind of know where your mind should be. And so you're saying that the Tuesday one is all about tools, is that right?
Yeah, it's tools of the trade Tuesday, you know, like tools in general. Tools of the trade are one of my big fascinations. Just got this from my grandma. It's actually my great grandfather's hammer. When he was a cobbler student.
Oh, cool.
And so this is now going into my leather workshop. And so these things, they do a lot for me ever since I'm a child, you know. Started with fishing when I was 3-4, and I remember vividly how much I loved the fishing rods and the fishing knives and nets and all the little bits and pieces. It was really, the tools of a specific trade was always what really interested me, got me going and fascinated. You know?
So what are Max's core spoon carving tools of the trade?
I think I'm a pretty big fan of a simple toolkit, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a tool for a task. You know, I do think that high-end tools are not necessary to get good at something, but I think that high-end tools with a better steel, with a finer grain, with a better edge retention, better geometries, etc., will help you reach your potential in a different way. So I do think that a specific good tool is great, but I'm a big fan of keeping it simple. So for the longest time, I literally had one axe, one knife, one hook. You know, and I somewhat took a little bit of that was a little bit of pride for me in not having a specific chip carving knife and a coal rosing knife, but taking my Sloyd knife and making it work for everything. And I think that having to wrap my head around that and think about the whys, that's my big catch, so to say. I was able to keep myself in this learning curve, in this learning loop, by constantly seeing, what does my knife do? What's the bevel on it? What's the angles? How can I make it work? How can I make it work for me in different situations, And now, of course, with a bigger output, I just have a good time getting more specific tools. So now, manufacturing tools, after about 10 years, 11 years of carving, I can definitely go nuts, because whatever I've learned over the years about tools that I liked and didn't like, or what I would feel was missing on the market, I would be able now to just draw up with my partner, with my forging partner, draw up for them, make exact measurements, bevels, details, do a bunch of drawings and angles and everything, and then test prototypes for as long as I find it necessary to get to what I would want to put my name on, and
Nice.
what I would personally like. And there's a lot of pride for me in not just rushing it and bringing a product to the market that would then generate profit for me, but having a product where I'm like, I wouldn't be able to make this any better for what this is.
Yeah.
And then I feel like, okay, and now we can talk about how we're gonna put this on the market.
Yeah.
Because they're sticking with you for your whole life. I don't think any of us will reach an age where we have sharpened our way all the way through a hook knife. I don't think so.
You haven't seen how badly I sharpen my hook knives.
I know, with the angle grinder.
Yeah. So it's the fastest way to do it.
Man, you're
yeah.
right.
So you said that when you started out, and like the classic core tools for spoon carving are an axe, a straight knife, and a hook knife.
Yes.
And so for people who have those tools and they want to start like expanding, what would you say, what for you would be like the next tool to add to that very small toolbox?
Yeah, I'm very specific about the whys of my tools, as you know.
Okay. Yeah.
I even brought up quite a few videos on my Instagram and also on my post page on Boontvie, where I'm literally only talking about like a hook knife strategy for bowls, for example.
Right.
What is the different types of hooks that are basically in existence? Like, we can put them in different categories, and what would be their strong suit, and what would be something that's extremely versatile, and what would be something more maybe specific or niche, but still would excel at that. And for me, in that regard, there's definitely something I would call an asymmetric radius, or like a symmetric radius tool. An asymmetric radius, what I call an all-round hook knife, is anything that would have a tighter and more open curve in one. And this is the knife that I recommend to anybody to start with, because there's literally nothing too small or too big for like a 6. In this case, this is my all-round 6-centimeter all-round hook knife. It's very compact. It doesn't matter if you're doing a tiny scoop or you're doing a huge spoon, because a hook knife's never going to be too small for a spoon. For a big one, it might be too big for a small spoon, but it hardly, you have something compact you can do anything with. You have enough, grip strength and form strength, you can make a Cooks of this. Doesn't matter. So I like these to start with, an all-round, asymmetric curve. And then at some point, there's definitely a point for bringing in a symmetric curve, which is most famous would be a Tukakam, which is of course a symmetric curve with a symmetric radius, which is allowing you to use any part of the hook knife with the same effect, which is great because you can use it double-handed. You can use it at different angles within a bowl, but you would always achieve the same effect, and that is especially useful when it comes to bigger spoons, when it comes to Cookses and bowls and everything. And then there's something I added, which is also in the same realm, and I have these in several different sizes. I call this a 3/4 circle. It's basically a Tukakam with thicker blade, so it has less flex, and it's extended nearly, as you say, 3/4 of the curve of the circle. And it's kind of allowing you to do a certain amount of offhand carving, so it kind of becomes partially hook knife in my case is a right-handed one, but it becomes a left-handed to a certain degree, and it would allow you within a Gouges, for example, especially the bigger version of this, which is 6 centimeters big. It allows you to use the other side for the very difficult transitions in the Gouges, for example. So this is the second two I mentioned would be the ones to extend your kit, you know.
Yeah.
As far as axes, I have to say that I always recommend to use the heaviest axe as possible.
And why is that?
My reasoning for the love of big and heavy carving axes, and this is not even my biggest, this is like the medium one, my journeyman, the one that was supposed to be really a total all-rounder. And this weighs about 800 grams. The reason for that is that there is, if you're interested in, like, let me just, like, you know, rabbit hole into that.
Oh, heck yeah, let's nerd out about sharp things. That's why most of us got into spoon carving.
Yeah. I get to use an axe.
Exactly.
Yay! You know, the reasoning for me for heavy tools when it comes to an axe is there's two factors that will be the same for all of us. That is gravity and the density of the work material. You know? So regardless of what size of person you are, there is going to be something like a subjective weight, which is like, if I weigh 40 kilograms, this is going to be a hog. I'm 85 kilograms and rather stocky. This is something I can definitely use. And I don't use them with my arms. I use them with my legs, hips, and gravity. So this is some of the benefits. So something that I learned in swordsmanship after, you know, having severe golf and tennis elbow, unable to lift a mug. I learned how to use the Japanese way of using swords, you know, which I teach, and then I started applying that for axes, which has a lot to do with you know, lifting things with your whole body, actually your hips and your legs, and then dropping it rather than lifting it with your arm and then excelling it from your wrist, which is going to cause all kind of issues. And because of that, I use the heaviest axe possible for anybody, because if you're a light carver, like I said, 40 kilograms of body weight, 56 kilograms of body weight, this is going to be a rather heavy axe for you. But if you're able to properly lift this one up with your whole body and then just let it drop, it's going to be more accurate for you, and it's going to be doing more work for you than an axe that weighs 600 grams, right? So there is not as much acceleration needed. Acceleration is less accurate. It's more fatiguing. It introduces more torque into your handle, which makes it ultimately less accurate. More glancing, because it's lighter. It's not going to bite as much. So all of these things lead to fatigue. Fatigue leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to injury. You know. So ultimately, everything is about less fatigue, more success, more fun, more safety. You know.
Yeah.
So always the heaviest axe possible for you, and learn to use it with your whole body. I used to just swing swords with my arms in Japan, and then after over 10 years of learning it, I realized the grip on the sword is very light, and it's all just hips and legs lifting it and then just dropping it. It's a very interesting.
It's similar. Like, I don't know if you've done much like Western boxing, but like, you know, it starts with your stance, so like where you put your feet, and like I think that kind of like disconnect is like any activity where you have to use your body, you know, and you spoke about this earlier, that like how your whole body kind of is involved in all of this, that you know, that like I think that especially with axe work, people will, like, especially beginners, like nothing else is moving and it's just this. And whereas like actually like there's a bounce to it. It was Fritjof at one of the spoon fests that I first saw bouncing with the axe, and it's that like you've got these huge leg muscles and they can like just lift you up, and like it doesn't have to be a big movement. That's
actually, like in all martial arts and all sports, everything we do, the energy always comes out of the ground, and that sounds very esoteric, but at the end of the day, the ground is where you're pushing yourself off from. It's the only thing that is really there as a backrest, so to say. So you're using your legs and your hips for that. The legs are the generator of power, and the hips are the distributor of power. It's the hub. And from the hip, it's decided if the energy goes back into the leg for a kick, for example, or it's going to be distributed in your upper body. So in Japan, even when we cut with a sword, it's not called really cutting, it's called cut dropping. It's called kiri orosu, and orosu means to drop in Japanese.
Yeah.
So that cut is not an accelerated cut all the way, it's more like a quick acceleration and then using gravity to just let it drop. And the grip on the sword is also something that I'm implementing for carving in all regards, because I used to have such bad inflammations in my arms.
Yeah.
I would grip everything too much and always with my forefinger and my thumb, and that is completely wrong.
Yeah.
Even in judo, when we would grip the fabric and rip, we would never use these two fingers that you would regard as very strong. We would always use our pinkies. The pinky was the one that would really get the grip, and use the pinky for the curl and for the ripping, and then your whole body, it would be just an angle. And then in carving and in sword use, these two last fingers are called Takanotsune, which means hawk talons. So the other fingers, even with the heavy sword in hand, the other fingers would be completely loose, and they would just index the direction of the cutting edge. But they would be completely loose. The only two fingers that would do any type of work would be the pinky to 70% and 30% on the ring finger. And so now I tell students, I talk about this as tenouchi, which is the Japanese word for this type of gripping. It means the house of the hand. Te is the hand, and uchi is the house, tenouchi. So when you implement that, you will realize that you will be more accurate, because you're not twisting your work tools in your hand. They will not twist accidentally. You will not have to grab onto them harder, and thus you will not fatigue as much.
Yeah.
So very, very loose in the forehand, and then just having these as these talons, and you will realize that you have less glancing, you're more accurate, and you're not talking the direction of the blade as much. It's these tiny little details that I was forced to learn, because I had such bad inflammations in my elbows that I could literally not do anything anymore, right?
Yeah.
I had this cutting test in Japan in 2012 for my 5th dan. And it was like cutting with a Japanese antique sword, and I nearly lost it, nearly flew across the room, because the inflammation in my right arm was so bad that I could not do anything. I was literally standing there like this when I didn't hold the sword, because my arm was completely useless from overusing and using the wrong muscles to do work.
Out of interest, so slightly off topic, but how heavy are the Japanese swords that you're using?
So Japanese swords, it's depending what style and what they're for. There's anything from kamisoriba to very, very heavy swords that we used for battles. So they were not as sharp, and they would have a very bally convex grind just to destroy bones, basically. But the overall weight is usually between 1 and 1.5 kilograms.
Okay.
But of course, they're like usually depending about a 25 to 30 centimeter handle that's got, and then the nagasa, which is the length of the blade, would be anywhere from 65 to 80 centimeters. That means there is a lot of that weight is actually up front.
Yeah.
There's all kind of tapers and grinds that would help you with balance. The weight of the tsuba with the sword guard would bring the weight back to the handle a little bit. There's a lot of things you can do in that regard, but you will learn how to use something. The next thing is swinging a Japanese sword in Iaido, which I train there and teach in Europe. You swing it into thin air. There's nothing to stop the blow, With an axe, I at least have the benefit of accelerating it, but then being stopped by the workpiece.
Yeah, you don't have to pull back.
It's just something that I cut with, and then if there is no cutting test, but during forms and kata, it would just stop in air. So if I would use the wrong technique, I would constantly have to catch that sword, right?
Yeah.
And doing that hundreds of times a day will teach you to use the right muscle, or you will have the destroyed wrists, destroyed elbows, destroyed shoulders, right?
Yeah.
So you cut with the hip with the Japanese sword, which is entirely counterintuitive, but it's beautiful as soon as you learn that, and then it gave me the fortunate opportunity to just implement that in tool use,
Yeah.
Because it is more or less the same thing. So yeah, cutting heavy carving axe, use it with the right technique, and totally drifted off topic as I used to.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so you've talked about how. Yeah, so we've talked about.
Sloyd
Yeah,
knives.
great.
I like big Sloyd knives. I like them to be versatile. So this is my Swayback Sloyd. That I'm a very big fan of angled back knives. It also comes from my training with Japanese swords, of course, that are designed as far as curve the sori to do the work for you. So I find it counterintuitive to a certain degree to keep Sloyd knives very straight, or bushcraft knives that even kind of crouch forward.
Yeah.
There's no sense to it, because actually what you want to facilitate and help yourself with is actually touching the workpiece with as little surface of the blade as possible. So all the force goes into a very small a length of the cutting blade, which is going to be more efficient. So having it more curved and having it kind of angled backwards is actually aiding you in that, and you don't have to manipulate your wrist as much to do that. Just holding it straight like this, you see that it already helps you with that angle. So I really put a lot of thought into all of these little details and the whys. So my tools might just look a little bit different to a certain degree. Even with the carving axes, they balance sideways, like horizontal like this, for a reason. That's how the very good old felling axes back in the day used to balance. And the reason for me is that before every strike, there's a backswing. If everything is extremely blade heavy, I mean, you have to backswing or lift as often as you have to drop.
Yep, what goes up must come down.
That's right. So, but why is this not part of our consideration when we design an axe? It was when we were like on very big old felling axes that had a lot of work going into them, because every backswing is needed for a cut, right? So if I have a very front heavy axe, it's gonna be a nightmare every single time I go for this somewhat of a pendulum motion. So I would be able to design a heavy axe like this, but going for this feature here of keeping them balanced horizontally, it's less fatiguing while doing the same amount of work. So there is a lot of these little details going in that, like how far the beard's coming up there. I just measured and did a lot of experimentation with proportions and why they are and why they're not.
Yeah.
And I just came up with a recipe for myself, based on the research I did. I went up to Denmark once to Roskilde, to the shipbuilding harbor there.
Oh, yeah.
I went through all the tools there. I went through a lot of different museums. I had a lot of different axes built. I forged axes. So it has been about 10 years coming to this point.
Wow. Yeah.
Just ensures that everybody gets a tool that they really love picking up and they love using, and it just makes it all so much that much funner, right?
Excellent. Yeah. It's so much more enjoyable to carve with like a really well-made tool. So like for example, like the Mora 164, the new hook knife, like it's probably the most available like half decent hook knife that's out there. Like there are some very cheap, very bad tools out there. But like it was interesting, like with your 3/4 cooker cam design, that like on the Mora, I've used that tip in the same way to be able to like use a push, but because it's such thin steel, it flexes a lot, and that's one. And like it's also uncomfortable to push on the back of the blade. So it's interesting that I don't know if you look towards the Mora as like part inspiration, but
I really don't.
Yeah.
It's more the idea of making a scope, but a scope is very difficult. A scope is very difficult to make in a completely circular fashion.
Can you just explain what a scorp is quickly for people who don't know?
A scorp is basically a teardrop-shaped hook knife that is continuing on the other side. So you just take in two or round hooks, two like hooks like that, They look like an upside down teardrop. And so it allows you to use it in both directions. But on a manufacturing level, I don't really use an offside hook knife myself ever. So I didn't have I myself, it was not a priority for me to design a scope. It wasn't.
Yeah.
I wanted to have a Tucam that was then able to also do a part of the more difficult transitions on the other side, but a scope being usually teardrop shaped and like very difficult, possible, but very difficult to make 100% circular on a manufacturing basis and still keep the price somewhere where it's manageable for people, plain and simple. Like carving tools, good tools should cost what good tools are worth.
Yeah.
But there's a limit to that, making it accessible for more people. So I decided to go with a thick enough blade on a 3/4 circle that still allows you some of that stuff with less flex and completely rounded spine. It's another very important feature on all hook knives that I'm very adamant about, because my left hand looks terrible. But all the spines have to be extremely rounded, because more than the right hand, the left hand with the pushing of the blades is taking a beating. And I don't have to show you what my hands look like.
I've cut myself on the blunt side of the Mora 164 from just like pushing too hard.
It starts to dig into that finger, right?
Yeah.
And you see these.
You can see them. Yeah.
And so they start to cut into the first finger crease. If it's too up, and it just keeps working itself in until it's through.
Yeah.
So but I would encourage everybody who has a Mora, don't worry about modifying them. I have sharpening courses out there for that. I don't say it to anybody like, oh, you have a Mora, you have to buy something else. I'm just saying, oh, that's a great opportunity. It will be a less scary blade to learn more about sharpening. You don't have to get a flush of anxiety when you're grabbing your Nick Westerman or one of my blades. It's not cheap, right? And you just start it out, and it comes to sharpening, and actually put that onto a piece of 320 sandpaper, and you start sweating and stuff. Rather just take one of those and make a mistake there and learn it, and you can just abuse that Mora until you learn sharpening, and that's a great opportunity. And if it really, for some reason something goes wrong, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, so, I love Mora tools for their kind of accessibility, and like the low price is great. It's just, it gives people an opportunity to get started with spoon carving.
I even have a YouTube video that says that Mora 105 is the best carving knife available if you are considering it's readily available. Because if you're calling something great, you also have to take into account that if it's something that you have to wait 2 years for, it's just not that great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great in other ways, but I don't like the Mora 106 too much. It's too small of a handle, and you can't modify it because of the metal ferrule. I was always a fan of the Mora 105 with the big birch handle that you can actually modify yourself, and it gives you more handle length. I love that now. If I only had Mora 105s until the end of my days, I would be extremely happy. But there's nothing wrong with it, really. There's nothing wrong with these tools. I would really like to encourage people to rather get started with something like that on a budget of $100 than being afraid of getting into it because everything seems so intimidating. And
you've spoken recently about like how keeping a tool sharp is more important than the tool itself, and so I think that's if you want to like explain a little bit more about that.
I think there's a beautiful balance, and I learned that with old axes. When I lived here, like here in Austria and also in northern Canada, I would love to just buy very, very old antique axe heads at a yard sale that wasn't hipster scavenged yet. And then I would like, sorry, I'm such a hipster myself. But I would learn about that, like a very interesting lesson that some of these old axe heads would be extremely hard and some of them would be softer. And I sharpened them all with file, and with different techniques, and I had the best time of my life, just like learning axe filing precisely and then finishing them and then rehandling them, making leather sheaths and selling them to people actually who would work out there. And why I'm talking about this is that when you have a Mora knife, which would come in a slightly soft steel, that would have the disadvantage of you having to sharpen more often, but it would have the advantage that it would be a very good platform of learning how to sharpen, you know,
right?
Because hard steel is difficult to sharpen, not just because you usually need equipment for that, like diamond stones, ceramics, something like that, or like high-end waterstones. The other problem is that if the sharpening process is too tedious, you would get tired. And it would rather lend you, or like it would rather drive you to make mistakes as far as angles getting inconsistent, and then you're ending up with two super convex, whatever, bevel. And that still happens to me sometimes when I'm sharpening some of my insane Japanese leather knives, you know, that's not even aogami, but super aogami. And I'm just like, is this actually, I'm like there with a super coarse diamond and it's hardly removing anything, right? But with a Mora, you would be able to get a sandpaper block from Hewn & Holmes, for example, from Nick Westerman, which is really affordable. For a couple pounds, you get this self-adhesive sandpapers, super high grits, and this little plastic base. And you would be able with the Mora to really learn on like a 400 grit to reestablish a bevel, how to keep it flat, how to keep it stable, and that it would be more fun. And then once you're good at this, you can apply it to anything. And I mean, sharpness is the absolute priority. In the moment when you start spoon carving, the same day you should start sharpening practice.
Right, that's great.
Because
I love
it
that.
will be necessary within a very short amount of time, you know. And yeah, the edge retention is a big reason why I went up to bearing steel on my axes and on my blades. I get messages from people who've had my axe for 6 months and never had to sharpen it. It doesn't even have a microchip, versus like a Carlson 1045 classic Scandinavian carbon steel where nothing's wrong with that, but you would have it perfectly sharp and it wouldn't take even one spoon before it would have microchips. Because there's debris in your chopping block. It's tough hardwoods that you're hitting into. But yeah, it needs more knowledge about sharpening in order to get my stuff back to it. But even my hook knives, I had people sending me messages like, he said he was carving 20 spoons and he never had to sharpen his Lloyd knife, for example. It's insane, but it's harder to sharpen in the end, right? So you might as well start with the Mora and really get good at this, and then you upgrade to bearing steel or to 9HS, like what I'm using on my Sloyd knife. And you will be good and confident and like really knowledgeable about how to sharpen stuff by the time you get there, you know? But I would definitely encourage people to watch a course about that, you know, sharpening. I guess you have stuff out there, I have stuff out there. I have 3 courses separate, each is 2 hours, just about hooks, just about Sloyd knives, just about axes. Where you're learning how to make your own body into a human jig, you know, to keep angles and stuff like that. Excellent. It's been quite successful for people. So sharpening is absolutely mandatory.
Brilliant. And so earlier on in our chat, you were talking about how, you know, you had your core tools and you really took a lot of pride in like using your Sloyd knife for chip carving and coal rossing. And so being able to like use each individual tool for as wide a range as possible. And now you've kind of expanded your toolkit quite a bit. What would you say is your like most specific tool, your tool that only really has like one use?
Yeah, just a word about toolkit. It teaches you more about the potential of every tool and like makes you more creative in how to use it if you have less tools available. So I definitely encourage people not to go all out right away, but get yourself the most basic kit of a hook knife, some type of carving knife. It can even be your pocket knife, it doesn't matter as long as it has a keen edge. And some type of axe. Go to a yard sale, get a file, an old file for $1.50 or something. Put a like a Scandi grind, a flat bevel grind on it, and get carving, you know. And you will see these kind of tools will teach you so much, you know, before you really have to do something. So just that about that point, get creative. My most specific tool, good question. We have a couple of rows and we have some ads coming out, would be more.
Yeah.
But I think the most specific tool I have is the Gouges. I came out with 2 different Gouges based on, and I don't have them here down in the workshop, I'm sorry, but I should have brought some more stuff up, but they're basically very much used for roughing Gouges. So I would definitely start with a 4 or 5 centimeter wide gouge. The 5 centimeter wide one is very much for finishing cuts on big bowls.
Okay.
Because I find the 4 centimeter one to be perfectly aggressive and suitable for the first stage on a cookser where you're really trying to just get a little bit of a slope established. I use some of my adzes in the beginning too, which is fun, but I really definitely like the gouges. They're 4 centimeters wide, bearing steel, and they have like a steel ferrule on the strike side, and they have a copper ferrule on the front. I just love the copper one because it takes a nice patina. But it's just very much made to be struck with a mallet. And that would just get the initial part done. And then, of course, after that, I have various different sizes of crooked gouges. And they can be used on big ladles and everything as well, if you are able to fasten your spoon somewhere. But they're specifically for me used for getting a little bit further than the straight gouge in the cookser carving process and really establishing that undercut at the bottom. And I make 3 different lengths, and we have on the smallest one we have a 3 and a 4 centimeter wide one. The 3 centimeter wide one, super short neck, very crooked, is definitely also somewhat of a spoon gouge. So so these are very specific, and I really only use them on those type of projects, but I also find them extremely fun for that. So I wouldn't want to miss them. I'm not saying you can't use a Tupacam for that, but it just speeds up the process for me and makes it a little bit more precise, if you will, down the stages. And they can also be really nice for doing some finishing cuts. If you want to have the inside of your cookser, for example, with nice established facets, I would use that crooked gouge to establish each of the facets and kind of keep them that way. So
I found with gouges as well, like going back to like using your whole body, you can get your body weight on top of it a little bit more than you can with the cookser.
I put them very close to my body usually, bring my elbows in, and then use my whole body to guide like this. I very much use it like this.
Okay.
And guide them through like this and with my whole body. This is possible too. With the straight gouges, I put my thumbs on it usually like a guide, kind of work him like this. But with the crooked ones, I definitely use a lot of this because my whole body weight goes into that. I don't have to push from my triceps or something. I'm just dropping my body into the gouge. You know, I love using tools that way. You know?
I just love using tools. Yeah.
We're such a tool, man. You're such a tool.
It's a massive, massive tool. You're not the first person to say that. Yeah.
I'm not the first person to tell me that, or it's not the first time I hear it. Every single time someone tells me that, I'm like, oh, thank you.
That's great.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing
wrong. Well, we've just spent the last 20 minutes talking about how awesome tools are, so that's great.
Right.
So if people want to find out more about like those sharpening classes that you run, or if they want to try some of your tools out for themselves, where can they find all of your stuff across the internet?
It's everything on the Woodsmans Finest usually. So I have a website, woodsmansfinest.com. The Woodsmans Finest just came along as a little bit of a take on like old brand names. Growing up in an old town, I would see the signs of different trades hanging there, and it would be usually finest this, finest that, or like, I don't know, blah, 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 and sons or something. And I wanted to keep going with that a little bit. So it's all on the Woodsman's Finest, Instagram, Facebook. Of course, YouTube, there's a lot of content there that's all free. A lot of tool reviews, tool presentations, lots of stuff that I talked about today, a little bit more in detail. But through my website, you also get to my course page. Right now, there is 55 hours of courses, I think. It's all carving, my carving systems, the triple C method for carving, body vices, body locks, Takanotsune, it's all on there. 3 sharpening courses, decoration, chip carving, carbonizing, you name it, it's on there. We just recently did some leathercraft courses and some chopstick courses, a system for carving chopstick embroidery. Yeah, it's pretty fun. So all that is on Boon TV, but you access it through my website. It says online courses.
Great. So well, I'll make sure that I include a link to that somewhere.
That would be very lovely. Yeah. Is there anything else that I can help you with today? Is there anything else
no, I think that's everything. Yeah, it was a really great chat. We covered so many different topics. That was a really enjoyable talk. So thanks a lot for joining me, Max.
Well, thank you for having me, man. Like, this is such a sweet opportunity. Yeah, and you know, we we get to chat a little bit beforehand usually, and so that's kind of a treat as well.
Yeah, it's good fun.
Craftsmen, right? We don't get to chat with other people.
Yeah,
sitting in
all of our colleagues.
Yeah. Right. All of our employees and colleagues.
Yeah. Excellent.
No, thank you very much for this platform. I love talking these kind of things, and reaching people is always a little bit tricky, you know. So I definitely appreciate it for you letting me ramble on here, and for your patience as a great interviewer to let me do my thing here.
Hey, it's purely selfish. It's content that I don't have to make now, so that's great.
All right, let's see it that way.
Yeah. So thanks for doing all the hard work, Max.
Well, thank you very much for having me, bud.
Yeah, no problem.